The quill trembled in Mateo's hand, but not from the cold of the dungeon. The chill of stone, of iron, of the stagnant air thick with the smell of damp earth and despair, he was used to that. His quill trembled because of the sound, the creak of a raw-eyed rope as it slid through a metal pulley on the ceiling, followed by a choked gasp that never became a scream. Mateo's job was to record the truth. But in this place, the truth was whatever pain forced a tongue to speak. He was a novice monk, assigned as a scribe to the holy office of the Inquisition. An honor, the abbot had called it. He was the eyes and ears of God, documenting the righteous struggle to purify wayward souls. At first, Mateo had believed it. He sat on his hard wooden stool, parchment spread before him, the pot of black ink ready. This severity, he believed, was a form of mercy. The body's pain was temporary, but the eternal damnation of a heretical soul was the true tragedy. He had to believe that. The first woman of the day was brought in. Her hair was a tangled mess, matted to her sweat, streaked face. She was a midwife, accused of using herbs and whispers to heal, blasphemy against God's own power to mend. She said nothing, her wild eyes fixed on a point in the distance, as if she had already escaped her own body. Does the accused admit to making a pact with Satan? The Inquisitor's voice echoed in the stone chamber, as cold and emotionless as a church bell. The midwife shook her head, a small, barely perceptible movement. The Inquisitor nodded to the large man in a leather apron standing in the corner. The executioner. He moved forward without hesitation. This was his work, just as transcribing was Mateo's. Each had his role in the great endeavor. Mateo told himself this, his knuckles white around the quill. They bound the woman's wrists behind her back with a coarse rope. Mateo could see the skin chafe. The main rope was hooked to that binding, and then, with a jarring squeal of the mechanism, the executioner began to turn the crank. The woman was lifted from the floor, the entire weight of her body suspended by her unnaturally twisted arms. The dry pop echoed in the room. Mateo flinched, splashing a long streak of ink across the parchment. It was the sound of joints being pulled from their sockets. The woman convulsed, her face a mask of agony, but no scream escaped. Only a low hiss through clenched teeth. Confess, the Inquisitor said, his voice level. Mateo ducked his head, forcing his focus onto the page. He wrote, "The accused was subjected to the strappado. She remains obstinate in her silence." He formed the letters neatly, mechanically. He described the procedure, the time, the questions asked. He did not describe the sound of a shoulder tearing. He did not describe the way the woman's body trembled uncontrollably. That was not the truth the office required. When they lowered her, her arms hung uselessly. She crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. But Mateo's faith held, though it now bore a scratch. This was necessary, he repeated to himself. A painful purification. Weeks later, that reassurance began to crumble. The accused was younger this time, charged with reading forbidden books. She was brought before a deceptively simple object, an iron chair. The judgment chair. Only up close did Mateo see the hundreds of small, sharp metal spikes that covered every surface, the seat, the back, the armrests. They stripped her to her thin chemise and forced her down. She let out a sharp cry as the first points bit into her skin. They used leather straps to bind her wrists, ankles, and waist to the chair, ensuring that any movement, no matter how slight, would only deepen the pain. "Do you renounce the heretical teachings that have poisoned your mind?" the Inquisitor asked. It was philosophy, the girl whispered, tears streaming down her face. Poetry. It was heresy, he corrected. There was no sudden jerk, no breaking of bone, just a quiet, prolonged agony. Mateo watched the girl try to hold herself perfectly still, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He saw beads of sweat mingle with the small dots of blood that began to blossom through her thin garment. The questioning went on for hours. The same questions, over and over. The denials grew weaker. And Mateo began to truly listen. The questions were not a search for truth. They were traps, designed to humiliate. Did you imagine a world without the Church's guidance? Did you feel pleasure when you read those words? Mateo looked from the serene Inquisitor to the girl shivering on the chair, and for the first time he did not see a lost soul being saved. He saw a sparrow being toyed with by a cat. He still wrote, but his hand was cold as stone. The words he recorded felt like a lie. The accused was questioned upon the judgment chair to encourage repentance. Encourage. The word was obscene. By the time the session ended, the girl had confessed to everything they wanted. She confessed to conspiring with demons, to renouncing God, to dancing at witches' Sabbaths. She would have confessed to causing the plague if they had asked. Mateo recorded it all, his quill scratching across the parchment, but his mind was elsewhere. It was trapped in the silence between screams, in the vacant stare of the woman with ruined shoulders, and in the tiny blossoms of blood on a white chemise. That night, in his small cell, Mateo could not pray. The words stuck in his throat. He looked at his own hands, the hands that had documented agony, as if it were a common ledger entry. He was not the executioner, nor the judge. But he was their storyteller, and in doing so, he had turned cruelty into procedure. The scratch in his faith had now become a deep, gaping crack. The ink on Mateo's fingers felt less like a mark of his trade and more like a permanent stain. Each time he was summoned to the interrogation chamber, the crack in his faith widened. He no longer told himself comforting lies about a divine purification. This place was a slaughterhouse for souls, and he was its bookkeeper, chronicling every scream. This time, the victim was a defiant woman, accused of heresy for publicly questioning a bishop's lavish spending. They laid her on the rectangular wooden frame. La tortura del putro, the torture of the colt. The rack. At each end of the frame were rollers, around which thick ropes were wound. They fastened her wrists and ankles to them. Renounce your slander, the Inquisitor commanded. The truth is not slander, she replied, her voice clear. With a nod, two executioners began turning the rollers at opposite ends. The ropes drew taut. The wooden frame groaned. Mateo heard a stifled moan as the woman's body was stretched. He tried to focus on the parchment, but the sounds wouldn't let him. The strain of the ropes, the creak of the wood, and then a chorus of small, sharp snaps as ligaments and cartilage began to tear. I ask again, the Inquisitor said, his voice rising to be heard over her groans. Do you confess your sin? She could only shake her head. A spastic movement. They kept turning. Mateo felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat. This was not interrogation. This was the disassembly of a human being, joint by joint. He heard a choked scream, followed by an abrupt silence as her shoulder dislocated completely. The quill slipped from Mateo's sweaty fingers, leaving a long, jagged streak of ink on the record. He had marred the official document. For the first time, the perfection of his work was broken, just like the woman's body on the rack. But the horror was not done with him. The following week, he witnessed worse, instruments crafted with a calculated cruelty that was aimed squarely at the victim's gender. First came the iron spyher. A woman accused of adultery was brought before the stone wall. The executioner used tongs to pull a clawed, metal implement glowing red from a brazier. He pressed it against her. The sizzle of burning flesh and the acrid smell of scorched linen filled the air, mingling with her shriek of agony. This tool, Mateo realized, was designed not just to inflict pain, but to annihilate dignity, to leave a permanent, shaming scar. Then came the pair of anguish. The young girl, accused of licentious speech, was gagged with the pear-shaped metal device. Mateo could not watch. He turned his head, but he could not escape the sound of the mechanism, the turning of the screw, and the girl's muffled, desperate weeping as the device expanded within her. In that moment, Mateo understood a terrible truth. This was not about heresy or sin. This was a war against the female form itself, an attempt to control, violate, and silence it in the most brutal ways imaginable. Record her confession, Brother Mateo, the Inquisitor said, his voice cutting through Mateo's stupor. The last victim, the woman from the rack, was broken now. She was murmuring whatever they wanted to hear. Yes, she was a heretic. Yes, she had consorted with demons. Yes, She deserved her punishment. Read it aloud, the Inquisitor ordered. Let these walls bear witness to her repentance. Mateo felt the blood freeze in his veins, to give voice to their lies. He lifted his head and met the woman's hollow eyes. She was looking at him, not with hatred, but with an utter emptiness, as if her soul had long since departed, leaving a shell to wait for its release. His throat closed. He opened his mouth, and a strange, trembling voice emerged, his own. I, the undersigned, do confess thy sins. Each word was a hot coal in his mouth. He read the fabricated confession, his voice cracking on the words heresy and God's mercy. He had become part of the machine. His quill was their instrument, and now, so was his voice. When it was over, when the woman had been dragged away and the room was quiet again, Mateo sat for a long time. He picked up the quill, dipped it in the inkwell, and completed the day's entry with a strangely steady hand. There was no more trembling. No more hesitation. A cold hollowness had replaced the horror. He had recorded the truth of the Inquisition. And in doing so, he had recorded the death of his own soul.